Welcome,
right
everyone. We are in the cantina. I'm drinking my beverage. We got some stragglers that have wandered in. I don't know how the bouncer didn't do his job, but we got a guest with us. I'll start with myself first before we go around the bar and introduce ourselves. I'm Drake. I'm a pastor at Trinity Reformed Church in the Vegas area. 4 kids and 2 dogs. A cat that has like a cold for the last 6 months. I don't understand it. And I love Legos and LED lighting.
My name is Brian Hodge. I have about 3 dogs. And
There's an estimate?
For sure. Wait, well, you have 2 for sure. Where's the third one?
Well, the third one's a pug, so it's not really a dog. It's kind of
Okay.
a cross between
That
a
makes
rat
sense.
and a dog.
It's a gnarly cat.
Yeah. It's like it's like a
Princess
mean
Bride, like weird animal thing.
Yeah, actually, that's probably redundant. Mean and cat. So I take that back. It's
except
just like
for my cat. My cat is the chosen one.
Everybody's cat is the exception until you take it off. And then,
mine is for real.
They said that actually a dog will wait a couple weeks to eat you if you die in your house, but a cat pretty much goes in right away. So that's the hard facts of.
They're just pragmatic. They're not mean. They're pragmatic.
Yes, there you go. They're just like, well,
which leads to me.
I don't want it to go bad. And I also like Legos, but not as much as Drake. So that's all about me.
Yeah.
And I am April Cato, and I am a wife and mother. And I say this most times: I am not a pastor. And tell the people who you are. This is my brother.
Hello, I'm David Jorgensen. I have my own channel, but I won't talk about that. That doesn't matter.
Plug your channel.
Plug the channel.
Have a channel and you're like, oh, it doesn't matter.
Work, Wisdom, and Wonder, where we talk about just all sorts of random different things. But I am a layperson who loves theology and is continuing to study it and applying for a PhD in the UK to go study theology of beauty and storytelling.
Which little school in the UK would that be?
I've applied to Cambridge and Edinburgh, and actually, I guess this is where I got into Edinburgh, and I'm waiting to hear back.
Oh, nice!
I found out this morning.
I was saying, wait, you didn't tell me that yesterday.
Yeah, congrats!
I got the message this morning, so I guess this is where it goes.
That's excellent.
I love how that's like your fallback school.
That's his backup school.
That's right. I got into Yale, but I'm waiting to hear from Harvard.
Yeah.
Anyway, I also like Legos, though I haven't played with them in probably 2 decades, so maybe I don't like them that much.
I don't play them.
And if this goes horribly wrong, you can blame Brian because he invited me yesterday.
This is gonna go so right. This podcast can't go wrong, even when it seemingly does.
It can't go wrong because no one watches it.
Right. We don't have
there
enough.
You go.
Yeah. These are all like the first year has just been like, this is how we get the kinks out and get all the bad comments.
Well, if you don't have any haters, you're probably doing something wrong.
Well, yeah.
By the way, what are we actually talking about today?
Well, are we done? I was going to transition, but I had to take a sip, because I'm in a cantina. So, all right, what are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about substitute teachers. We're talking about substitutionary atonement theory. So, looking into different views of what is accomplished on the cross. We understand generally that salvation is accomplished on the cross. We understand that people are in Adam, and after the crucifixion, resurrection, and the ascension of Christ, those who are put their faith in Christ are now under the second Adam. But as far as what did Christ accomplish in the crucifixion, what was he atoning for? We understand that atonement is all over both the Old Testament and the New Testament. We understand that there is a Levitical sacrificial system in the Old Testament that is a type, a shadow of ultimately what Christ is. So the question is like, what is the Old Testament typologizing, and what is Christ anti-typing when he does what he does? And there have been different views in the early church. A lot of, we'll get into different views, I guess, but all the way from Christ has made us, did his work to make us a better person, to, Christ fulfilled the justice of God and the wrath of God. And then, of course, what is justice and what is wrath? Because a lot of people have a problem with the violence of Christ's crucifixion and understanding that how does that translate to the wrath of God and whatnot. People will say this is child abuse. I think I've heard the argument.
Yeah, cosmic child abuse.
Cosmic child abuse. So for the modern evangelical, you might say, no, well, there is no other argument than penal substitutionary atonement as I understand it. And I guess we're here to burst the bubble and say, no, this is a hot topic in the Christian church. It's debated still today. It's been debated through church history. And you might be surprised to think that while, I'm getting way ahead of the discussion here, but I'll just kind of show the cards. I think there's a lot more than just penal substitutionary things going on. And when we overemphasize one thing, we get in trouble. Just like if we overemphasize the persons of the Trinity, we can become a pluralist, or not pluralist, but
polytheist.
Polytheist. Thank you. If we focus too much on the unity, we become modalists. So it's putting things in balance. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today, and hopefully we won't get too far in the weeds because it can be kind of confusing. But I'll hand it over to. I usually hand it whoever wants to speak next on
Do we want to go through, I guess, what the different models are, the different ways of understanding the atonement first, just kind of a flyover summary?
Yeah, why don't we have like each of us just talk about one, and I'll
take penal substitutionary atonement.
I'll take nothing because
I was gonna let you have whatever you were comfortable with. So that if you're comfortable with that, then go for it. That's the one that most people are familiar with, right?
Well, let me list them in historical order.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Right, let's do that, and then we'll each take one.
Is there? I mean, I think that's helpful. I guess my question is that even really possible to do? Because these terms, as we understand them now, are not really terms that were historically used, right? So you have language of penal substitutionary atonement all the way through church history, but it may be explained in other terminology, like, exchange, or, Christ being chastised for our sins. So it wasn't, the terminology, didn't a lot of that come later?
Well, I would say, there is anachronistic language, but like similar to if we were gonna look at like the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, like we would start in Nicaea because they just mentioned and the Holy Spirit. But if you want to go like, what do they think about the Holy Spirit? It would be like Council of Chalcedon or something. So like as far as order and like what are they emphasizing essentially? So I think different times in history are emphasizing different things just based on the context of what they're arguing against or discussing. So granted, I think all of these categories are baked in throughout church. There's not one, they're not like, oh, we just figured out penal substitutionary atonement. I think it's always there, but I think historically, like, oh, okay, they emphasize this aspect of it, this aspect. And then,
well,
go ahead.
I would argue also that Paul is, I think what we call penal substitutionary atonement is Paul's theology,
and Romans,
the core theology of the cross. Obviously, Christus Victor is there, all that other stuff, ransom and all that. But the reason why Paul emphasizes that aspect, not only is it core, and I think all the others intersect, and they are actually supported by it. This is where the EO, I think, gets it wrong, because I actually think that they're supported by it, that you can't have Christus Victor if you don't actually have the penal substitution.
Right.
But Paul emphasizes it, I think, because he's in an argument with Judaizers, right?
Yep.
And so he's got to talk about the law, and that's what penal substitution is. It's dealing with the Mosaic law, which I watched so many videos today talking about different theories of atonement, and almost none of them mention the law and the law being crucified. And I'm like, if you don't understand that, then you're not going to understand why all these intersect and why they're so necessary. But that's why he's there. Whereas the early church, Christus Victor, because they're in a fight with these pagan powers of Rome and persecution of the demonic world that's like trying to crush the church and everything. And so now they're picking up on also Pauline theology of the Christus Victor, where God has disarmed the authorities. That basically he now has the keys to death and Hades. It's no longer these powers that have the right to kill us and whatnot. And so I think that you have that throughout history, right? And then once again, when in the time of the Reformation, why does this come out so much? Because now we're dealing with almost kind of a modern, or not a modern, a medieval version of kind of the Judaizing that was going on in the early centuries. And so now, well, penal substitution becomes important once again.
Yeah, and I think you hit something very important with the understanding of how do you deal with the law. So how do you disconnect somebody from the Mosaic law? You have to, because if that covenant continues, everyone dies.
Yeah.
No one inherits the land. Everyone just rinses and repeats, and really the people of God diminish.
Mhm.
So you have to have something completely new. So you have to kill the other one, and you have to, again, as Paul says in Romans 7, one of my favorite verses for so many things, you have to die to one to be attached to the other. So then it's like, well, that's what Christ is ultimately doing. I think that's a really good point. And even in the book I'm reading, or Lamb of the Free, the arguments are, well, look what the law provides for us as an understanding of sacrifice, and there's no atonement sacrifice for high-handed intentional sin. There's only death.
Right.
So Christ can't be an atoning sacrifice in a penal substitutionary way. It's just that doesn't make any sense, because it's got to follow after the old covenant. It's like,
well, it
no.
is such a non sequitur if you understand, because if that was true, Christ wouldn't have had to come and die, because you would have already had it in the law.
Right.
And the whole point is that since it's not in the law, God has to do it through Christ. So
yeah, you would have had a satisfactory atoning sacrifice at that time.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need anything more.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to keep going back every year after year, like it says.
Right.
In Hebrews.
Yeah, exactly. And it's and so we'll talk more about the law, because I think that's really important, because those are the one thing I missed from it was the discussion about the law. Almost no one had that. And then the other discussion was, well, penal substitution can't be true because you can't punish an innocent party for a guilty party. They're different people. And so the lack of understanding of federal headship / unification, man, that is just like, that's killing the postmoderns.
But if you don't understand that, not only are you not going to understand the atonement, you're not going to understand the gospel, period.
Yeah, the Bible is a bunch of like piecemeal craziness that doesn't make any sense.
You can't inherit the things that Christ inherits if you're not connected to him.
Right.
Well, that's likely why you're getting this separation, is that therefore, because that can't happen, what Christ does must be something different. It's just Christus Victor, or it's just the example theory, or it's just the scapegoating or whatever, which I actually don't think scapegoating is correct at all. I would actually reject that one outright. That's just a modern French theory that we'll talk about. But
they get that from the distorted. Well, they get that
those French.
Yeah.
So for the sake of, well, the listeners, and for the newbie in the room,
yeah,
do we want to go through the views?
Yeah, let's do it,
because you're touching on them.
Brian, you take the moral. I'll take the ransom.
Okay.
I can do the Christus Victor one.
Okay, I'll take satisfaction then.
I'll do scapegoat then.
And then penal.
And then I'll do and then that's it.
That's all of them, right? That's 6.
That's 6. Yep.
And I'll listen intently.
All right.
Okay, so Christus Victor would just be that Christ comes to break the power of sin, death, and Satan in the world, right? So he has victory over all of those things in his life, death, resurrection, ascension.
Yeah, it tends to be usually early on connected to recapitulation theory. So he takes upon humanity. And as his divinity takes upon humanity, everywhere he goes and touches in his obedience, he subsumes into his divinity, so that everything starts becoming divine, and anything that was dead becomes alive. And so he goes into death itself to then actually and resurrects from death itself to show that he brings life out of death. So literally there's no chaos left, and therefore in that way he saves humanity that is in him. Although there is a tendency then, when you argue that way without understanding the rest of it, to even go toward more of a universalism, because if that's true, then ultimately Christ can redeem all of humanity, period, whether it's in him or not, because technically everything's in him, because he's the new Adam and he's the new human and whatnot. But
I
you
don't wanna
still
get
can't
too-
get an exclusivity in it too.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but I did
Yeah.
hear someone arguing for this position say something to the effect of, well, everyone who is resurrected, both the righteous and the wicked, are resurrected because of Christ's resurrection, right?
Yeah.
So that there's like that they're somehow both the righteous and the wicked are connected to him, and that's why they are resurrected.
They may be getting that from Revelation, because the wicked are raised,
Which we would all agree with, but
right.
but it
And-
seems like they're conflating some kind of a connection to Christ.
Yeah,
in that.
they may be looking at the verse in Revelation that talks about, and there's no more death, so he abolishes death.
Mhm.
But he throws death into the lake of fire, which is the second death.
Second
So,
death,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
be a bad guest. 1 second. I'm gonna get a notebook, write some stuff down.
I thought you were gonna go to the bathroom like your sister. But...
It's coming. Don't worry.
5, 4, 3.
No, that's your chance. You might as well. Oh, never mind.
He's back.
And I'm back.
Yeah. So the idea that this universal aspect of what is the victory over death given us. Christ doesn't give victory to any other than those who are attached to him in life. You can be attached to his resurrection, because even in Matthew, even after he said it's finished, right? The earthquakes, and then people like rose from the dead. Even after that, right? You had people walking around.
Mm.
So there's this aspect of the dead rising because he is the new Adam. But again, that doesn't necessitate everlasting life.
Mhm.
It will be unto everlasting judgment, which is the second. So being thrown into chaos. So just because Christ gives resurrection to everyone doesn't mean Christ gives a life to everyone.
Yeah.
And only and we know that only because Scripture is very clear.
Well, I think
and Matthew, I think, is clear on that too.
I think if we understand that life is a human in the world of the living, that's what life is. Life is, it's communion with God in the world of the living. It's in the created order. And so anyone banished from the created order has not been resurrected into life, right? They're existing, they're alive in a sense, but they're not they're not in life, because you have to be in the created order to actually be in the life of God.
Yeah, God will not judge any, like, this is oxymoron, but like human spirit. You're not going to be judged in like the spiritual form.
Yeah.
You're judged as who you are
In your
Deep
full
body.
in your fullness, and
Yeah.
connected to your body.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll do ransom theory. This is from my favorite theologian, one of my favorites, Origen. Yeah. So he basically ransoms either to God or to the devil. Christ gives himself as a ransom to pay off essentially a debt, in the sense that Satan owns the world, and he pays off Satan by dying in our place, and we are set free from death and sin and bondage to Satan. Or if you hold to the idea that Christ died as a ransom to the Father, then we are in the wrath or the justice of God, bound into sin, and will be given over to punishment. Ransoms pays the Father in his death to release us from that payment, and it's done on our behalf. And that obviously morphs over time, but that's generally the idea of the ransom theory, either ransoming from Satan or ransoming from God the Father.
So Narnia is ransom from Satan.
Yep.
It's ransom theory.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think Narnia has a couple of different ideas that are kind of integrated in it. But in
it's
that,
mainly ransom.
Yeah, ransom from the witch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, there's truth to that if you understand what's going on with the law and all that.
Mhm.
Well, we can talk about that later.
No, it's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
like the idea that you're being ransomed, like that the devil is being being in a sense paid off, right? Like you're paying a rent, like he's holding us captive. If you think of any modern hostage movie, like
He's
the
like the
hostages
mob boss.
right, and then like Christ comes in there and pays off the mob boss. I don't know, it's a weird, and I get that like Satan has his authority, and maybe that's the idea where like
It
God is
feels like you're negotiating with terrorists, which you're
right.
never supposed to do.
You're never supposed to negotiate with terrorists.
Well, I think that's the problem, is that if you don't understand the law aspect of it, it tends to be a caricature of
Mm.
oh well, the devil's hey, you can't do that, God, you got to pay me, and
Yeah.
like that's what
Yeah.
it sounds like or whatever.
Right.
But once you understand the whole system of like the covenant of works and what's going on there in terms of whether or not the devil gets at you or not, right? But again, we'll talk about that after we discuss these. So which one am I doing again?
Do you have
You're
a
doing the
question,
moral.
David?
Yeah, I had it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that particular caricature, if we understand ransom theory in that way, because let's be honest, the vast majority of people who read Narnia essentially have that kind of hostage taker view,
Right.
would be at odds with Christus Victor, because
Well-
now he's paying off the mob boss. He's not. That's
Well-
not a victory in the same kind of way.
Well, the idea is that humanity sold it to him. So it was Adam that he wasn't like doing his thing and then saying like takes him
Yeah,
captive.
Satan has a right to it.
Yeah, he actually gives it over like as a payment.
But David is right that if your view is kind of that more character view to where God is like, hey, I'll trade you, because I mean, you have this like Gregory
Yeah.
of Nyssa will argue that God actually tricked the devil. So like he's like, hey, I'll give you this really good guy who look how powerful he is.
Yeah.
And the devil's like, oh, all right, well, I'll trade you him then for your people. Great. And then he didn't realize it was the Son of God who was going to rise from the dead.
That's right. He's like, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Now that goes
Narnia.
against the gospel.
Yeah.
The gospels are very clear.
It's a
I mean,
good game
Jesus
show.
literally announces, I'm going to rise from the dead.
Right.
He tells everyone who he is. Was the devil not listening or something? I mean, I just don't think that's probably
Just didn't
a
believe
good
him.
way to put it.
No.
But that's also, again, that's the idea that the devil does have rightful claim to these people,
Right.
but it's not as though God's like showing up being like, hey, I'll pay you this if you let him go. Like, that's not how ransom theory works. Again, it works through penal substitution, and it ends up being Christus Victor. And so it all works together. But if you don't understand the laws aspect in that, you don't get the connection.
Well, then also like how is the strong man bound by the stronger man? So like saying, God isn't coming in and tricking him. He's literally like binding him.
Right.
It's forceful.
It's like, you're going to give me these people.
Their mind. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, which one am I doing?
Moral
example. So this is an easy one, right? So this separated from everything else is what a lot of liberalism tended to do.
Yep.
Now this is clearly a biblical idea. The entire book of Philippians does this. Peter does it. Frankly, it's all over the place in the New Testament, to where as Christ sacrificed himself for us, we should love and sacrifice ourselves for one another. Jesus literally gives this commandment, right? Love one another as I have loved you. No man has loved anyone greater than this, that he give himself up for his friends. So, and you're my friends. So and therefore you love one another. Like, this is the moral example theory is a 1,000,000% true. But again, if there's not a penal aspect, then what's Jesus giving himself up for us for? Like giving himself like for what? Like, again, so it's the other things are needed for that to be a true example, because otherwise, if Jesus is like, your friend isn't showing his love for you if he jumps off a cliff and said, "This is for you," like that doesn't
Like
help me.
Luke.
Why did you
Yeah,
jump
like
off?
Luke.
I
This
wasn't
is
falling
like-
off a cliff.
It's like looking at the crucifixion and doing the moral teacher thing. Well, Jesus, he was just a really great moral teacher. It's the same kind of reasoning.
Yeah, but why die? What's the point of that? If I don't have to die, then what are you dying for? That doesn't show me your love for
They
me.
have to find a way to explain it, and to
Right.
explain it away in a way that removes any punishment or any weight of sin.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I think the scapegoat, because the scapegoat theory to me is playing off of the liberal moral example theory, because it doesn't make sense. Why would Jesus die then?
I mean,
And
the
then it kind of
scapegoat
gives an
theory is the
answer.
worst of all of them, obviously.
It really is. Yeah. Again,
Well-
French.
Well, for the moral theory to be right, like in and of itself, you have to have an anthropology of man that is ultimately capable of good. So like this is
Pelagian,
Pelagius' problem.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Pelagius is a Sith Lord. Pelagian, Darth Plagueis the Wise. I was reading a story on him recently. Anyway, this was his problem, right? So like the crucifixion is just supposed to pull at our heartstrings so much that we want to be a better person.
Yeah.
And then he's the example to see how good he was. You have that ability too. You can die for people just like he did.
Yeah.
That's what Jordan Peterson is doing today, right? This is Jordan Peterson's view, is essentially that he's this great moral example, but the reality of Christ is not that important. Yeah. It's just that he's this picture.
It's the American gospel. You see it in Superman, right? So when like Jor-El's talking to Superman, he's clearly the Christ figure there. And he's like, I've given them you, my only son, because they have a great capacity for good. Yep. You just need to show them the way.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's clearly supposed to connect to Christ and be that whole moral example theory. But that also, again, like you say, it assumes Pelagianism, which is not only biblically wrong, it's self-evidently wrong. Like literally the dumbest theory. Like if I was an atheist, I wouldn't believe that people were basically good. Like that's so stupid.
Right.
They literally eat one another if you leave them, anybody read Lord of the Flies? I mean, come on.
Yeah. Anything more you want to say on that?
Nope. Do you want me to do penal now?
Now let me do satisfaction, just because that's before. So satisfaction is Anselm's contribution to this, because he understood the ransom theory and was like, this is kind of whacked. What does God owe Satan? So what we just kind of mocked a little bit. But there is the idea that like somebody owes someone. But instead of Satan or God owing Satan something, we owe God because we are sinful. And we owe, our lives are connected with him in separation. We owe him everything we've done wrong, right? So like everything disconnected from him, all the works we've done, there has to be a payment. And we owe everything that we should have done connected to him in this cosmic way, which would be, we can never repay. So this is the idea that of the servant that owes how many denarii is it? It's like a denarii that he'd have to live like 10 lifespans to ever pay back. So it's this idea. So the substitutionary substitutionary theory is taking the idea that Christ is the payment, our payment, what we owe. So his blood fills that gap and unites us again to God, and not only unites us in what we owe, but then we pay back in a sense, not pay back, but continue in life connected to him again in the good works that are predestined for us. So essentially that's Anselm's contribution.
Yeah, I think in Anselm, you almost have the first positive view of kind of like the active obedience of Christ, because his whole theory is obviously it's based on the whole like Lord serf thing. Whereas if you're if you're a serf of a lord, you owe every moment to that lord. And let's say you don't give him an hour, you can't work an extra hour because you already owe him every hour you have. So you don't have an extra hour to give to him because they already belong to him. And so you can never actually make up for that hour you didn't give to him. And therefore, Christ ends up atoning for that and fulfilling the obedience that we did not fulfill in terms of what he did. And so you have both this active and passive obedience of Christ dying for our sins, and then also filling the gaps of what we owed him, and therefore in our place, right? It's a replacement of us in that regard. Substitution, even though I don't think he ever uses that word, but
which, like, if you take it in isolation, like, and this is my biggest beef with isolated, because for the Reformed or the evangelical, this is what's isolated. Really the second version of that, which is the Reformed version of wrath, not just justice. So like, replacement is justice, penal is wrath, like expanded to wrath. So like this idea, like, well, God's justice is paid, what I owe is paid. So then I just like if I went to the bank and paid off my debt, I leave the bank and I live my life how I used to live it.
yeah,
It's already paid off. There's zero relationship. It's a memory. It's like, yeah, the bank was nice. The inside looked nice. I remember that. That's it. It's like,
yeah,
and I just wait until my time comes. And
Yeah, it tends towards an antinomianism.
exactly.
Yeah.
and in that regard, we can kind of acknowledge why people are concerned about isolating it and just having that as your prime theory, and then nothing else along with it, because it has actually led to antinomian practice within the evangelical church. Because if Christ paid for everything, he was obedient for me, then what left is there for me to do? Sure, I should probably obey him, but that doesn't have anything to do with my salvation. And it's like, well, no, because it's all Christ died for a lot more than just to pay for you.
All right, now we have substitutionary or penal
Okay. So obviously you guys elaborate, but just very simply, penal substitutionary atonement, Christ takes on the penalty, the due penalty of our sin on our behalf. So the penal, the penalty, and substitution on our behalf. Just very, very basically.
Yeah, I mean,
So becoming a curse for us, right?
Yeah.
This is like the Isaiah 53 language.
Yeah, he takes upon himself the wrath of God that we deserved. As God says in the law, I will in no wise let the guilty go unpunished. And there's punishment there. And therefore, either Christ paid for that, or we're all still receiving the punishment, because he said he will in no way let the guilty go unpunished. So either he takes that punishment for us, or we're in trouble. So
yeah, there's ultimately three possibilities, and this is what I think the reformers are helpful in, like, expanding replacement, because if you're just paying off God's justice, what we owe, then why did Christ have to die so violently? There could have been other ways to pay off. There's something else that is going on. And again, I think the wrath element is what's missing. So like this idea that, there is something that a just God has to dish out to the unrighteous, because like the law, this is where it is similar. Like the law, if you are a murderer, you have to die. You must die. If you are an adulterer, you must die. And ultimately, dying is being, Brian, you can expand on this because this is kind of your specialty, but dying is being taken out of the created order. And this is where people get wrath mixed up, because like the three options are, there is no, God doesn't have wrath. He just has justice. He has wrath, and it's the violent death of Christ. And you can mischaracterize it and say, well, that's just a blood sacrifice that the pagan gods required. Or three, we don't understand what God's wrath is. And I think it's the third one.
Yeah, we think it's emotion. We think it's, God is really just, he's angry, and it's almost like, he's the abusive father. He's really angry, and he's just got to take his anger out just because it makes him feel better.
Well, we think it's active. So this is the problem. We think that God's wrath is active in terms of, because this is where you get the cosmic child abuse argument, right? So the father's just beating up on Jesus. as though he's like, you know, if you were to imagine the Father is actually having a physical form, which he doesn't, but smacking Jesus around and then killing him on the cross. It's like, that's not what God's wrath is.
Yeah, and afterwards he's like, "Oh man, that was
Yeah,
just a weight
I
off
feel
my
Hold on
so
for
much better. I got
1,000
that all out
years.
of my system. No, but in reality, like we go all the way back to and again, this is all connected to the law and the covenant of works and whatnot. But the whole point is that and we might as well talk about it here. When you are in an obedient relationship with God, God's protection is over you. It's this the suzerain vassal treaty type thing. You are under his protection. Garden of Eden, you are under his protection. Outside the garden, that's where chaos is. That's where the destroyer is. The serpent is the serpent of the field. The field is outside the garden. And so outside the garden, that's where chaos is. That's the domain of the serpent. That's the domain of the destroyer. Whenever you have God say, you know, his wrath was poured out, even like looking at the plagues in Egypt, right? So his wrath is poured out on Egypt, and he killed all the firstborn, right? That did not have the blood sacrifice covering their households. But then you see in other scriptures that he killed the firstborn and poured out his wrath on them. How? By letting the destroyer, in other words, they weren't under his protection. Therefore, he let the destroyer kill them. When we read in Numbers, you know, we're going through Numbers right now. These people who grumble, God kills them immediately. They're all killed by God. The death sentence is given by God. But then when we read in 1 Corinthians 10, Paul says, well, who killed them? Well, they were destroyed by the destroyer. And so the point is that the wrath of God is God doesn't save your life. He gives you over to chaos. He gives you over to death. He decides for whatever reason, now specifically in judgment, in his wrath upon humanity, his wrath upon sin, he decides not to save those who are guilty. And on the cross, he has decided not to save Christ, not because he's mad at Christ, but because he has wrath upon humanity and wrath upon sin. He pours out wrath by letting the destroyer destroy him.
Well, and this is an important distinction to make, because if we confuse this, we think almost that that God is a life bringer and a death bringer, right? That he's
Right.
somehow both of these things. But God is only a life giver.
Right.
And if he withdraws that life from you, then there's only one other alternative.
Yeah. So when he talks about like, I'm the one who gives life and I'm the one who takes it, God takes life by decree. God takes life. If we look at like we have kind of the picture kind of rolled back so we can see heaven in like the book of Kings. And we see that he wants Ahab to die. And so he has pronounced Ahab's death sentence, but he doesn't go kill Ahab in war. He doesn't go to deceive Ahab to go to war. He asks which spirit wants to actually go do it. And the spirit comes up and this is how I'll do it. And he's like, okay, go and do it then. So it's through other agents of chaos that he gives these people over to. That's how his wrath is poured out. He is always life. He is nothing else but life. He is always love. He is nothing else but love. But life and love will not protect what is chaos and hate. And so he gives that over to itself. Romans 1, the wrath of God is poured out upon men. And how is it poured out? Well, because he gives them over to their bad religious ideas, and he gives them over to their sin. So their idolatry and sin, he gives them. That's how the wrath of God is poured out upon humanity.
And this puts in context and a better understanding of like the amazing thing about the resurrection of Christ returning back. And this is why the bodily resurrection is so important, because if the wrath of God is a removal of protection, allowing the destroyer to destroy, then the end for everyone up to this point is death, is being removed from the created order. Christ, however, in bodily form, comes back to the created order, not as a sacrifice anymore, but as a king, right? Now usurping and this is going into maybe the roll up of all these different views all into one. But understanding that if you have a false understanding of wrath, then you have a minimized understanding of the resurrection, because you don't. Why does Christ come back? Because it's like, is it just vindication in the sense that, well, you see, he was actually really good, or he was, actually he's not a sinner.
God's not mad anymore.
Right? God's not mad anymore. It's like, well, no, that's not what wrath is. There's something else that's going on.
Yeah.
That's way more pungent and way more like now baked into creation by him returning into the created order.
Jesus says, I lay my life down and then I take it back up again. I have the
Yeah,
authority to do so. And then in Hebrews, it says that he does so by the power of an indestructible life.
Yeah.
Right? Part of the resurrection, obviously, is also the fact that he is God. He is the source of life. And therefore, the removal of God's protection in that moment is not ultimate, because he has his own life within him.
Right.
And this burning back through death, defeating death, is this just kind of beautiful moment. Well, a very beautiful moment. I mean, the resurrection is everything. The resurrection is where our hope is. But just as you were talking about that, I have many notes now. So, so there is a question here as well.
Just to jump on that real quick, David. Acts actually says that he rose from the dead because death was not able to. It literally did not have the power to hold him. So you are right. That is absolutely he himself being God. But I would want to also emphasize that throughout his life on earth, God is constantly confirming, this is my son in whom I am well pleased. And then we have the picture in Philippians to where the son, the father was pleased with the son so much because of his obedience, even to his obedience to death on the cross. So the death on the cross is the son being in perfect harmony with the father absolutely seeing him as obedient and loving him perfectly, but choosing, not because he has wrath upon the son, but because he has wrath upon humanity and sin, choosing not to save the son at that moment, knowing that the son is able to then come back because death cannot actually hold him.
And that's why, and that puts it like a different perspective on like Gethsemane, right? When he is burdened unto like tears of blood, right? For what is, so like this, people think it's this impending turning away of the Father, right? Like he's going to be disconnected from the Father somehow in his wrath, right? The wrath.
You can't disconnect Jesus from the Father. They are one being.
Yeah.
Right. Is this understanding that like God is well pleased in his son, and he's going to be well pleased in what's going to happen, but he's going to be removing protection and letting the destroyer destroy. Which is a terrifying thing. Like if like when Israel's told, hey, I'm going to let the Assyrians come and destroy you, like they don't believe that. So they're not really scared until it happens. Jesus knows like if God is going to remove like that's a terrifying thing, to let the destroyer have his way with you. And he's really the only one that understands it until like, for Israel, it's the Assyrians at their doorstep.
I mean, Job understands a little bit about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Job, sure. Job is a very good typology for that understanding. But like, really like nobody else kind of really gets that. And we don't get that. When Paul says in Romans that God gives them over to the destroyer, people are like, it's not a big deal. I can do what I want. That's a great thing.
Yeah. Well, I don't think people realize the extent to which sin is the enemy of all mankind.
Yeah.
Like it masquerades as a friend and like it's great and it's wonderful and whatever, but it's a masquerade. It's just there to ruin everything.
Yeah.
So to be given over to it, like that's horrifying. Even just your own sin, nevertheless, also the sins of others now, in that kind of environment. And then still further, the destroyer himself. Like there's so many layers to the terror of sin that we do not understand.
But this is where also I think Chris's Victor comes in as a help, because if we understand the father, we don't really train our sons for war anymore, right? But imagine if like we were in like a Spartan culture. I know this isn't real because I just get this from the 300. But imagine
In the cinematic version of a Spartan culture.
imagine your son had to fight a wolf, right? And to get him ready for war or whatever, or to overcome something that he needed to overcome. But you had perfect knowledge. You knew your son was going to get bit in the arm, so he was going to be really hurt, but he was going to kill the wolf and he'd recover from the arm.
Mm-hmm.
You would 100% want him to do that. Now, forget the training. This isn't training. The cross is the war.
Yeah.
This is the war. Would you, as a good, loving father, want your son to go in, even though he's going to be harmed, but he'll ultimately come out the victory and win this war? 1,000,000% you would.
Yeah.
I mean, you have this even like, the father has perfect knowledge that the son is going to be resurrected.
Yeah.
You look at people who are in war and the guy who jumps on a grenade for his friend, like everyone thinks of that guy as a hero. And a lot of people don't think he's going to be resurrected. And even just in that, we understand the benefit of someone doing something sacrificial for someone else. Like this is baked into our understanding of what love is. So this idea that the father is going to say to Jesus, hey, don't jump on that grenade. I don't want you to do that. Don't jump on that grenade.
Right.
It's desiring something less than heroic from, the greatest man who ever lived.
Well, and it's short-sighted because God is anything, but he is not short-sighted. Like, so the idea that he's going to be like, no, don't jump on that grenade, even though I know that you'll resurrect, be perfectly fine, and receive all glory and honor and power and save all humanity that is in you from it. And no, don't do that because I don't want to be seen as a cosmic, child abuser and whatever. It's like, come on, it's ridiculous.
Well, and some of it, I'm just observation. I feel like we tie the concept of wrath with the concept of pain, and there is a notion in our society that pain equals evil.
Yeah.
Right. That is the shortcut in most people's mind. If it's painful, it must be evil.
I think that's our feminine.
Well, we also have a comfort culture, so that's part of it.
We are a mothered culture, and that's why.
But there's also this aspect that, like, again, kind of back to Hebrews, it keeps coming up, but Hebrews 12, when it says that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Like, there is an ultimate joy, but there's also a joy in the cross, in the obedience, in the moment, right? There's joy in both places. And I think we forget, we miss that because of this comfort culture, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And our shortcut, our heuristic that thinks pain equals evil. So if God inflicts pain, it must be evil.
Well, and that's not an issue just even with our culture. I mean, the epistles have to say it over and over, count it all joy, right? So like every culture is a comfort culture, and we base blessing on what we have. So is God with me when the Roman government is stealing all my stuff? And Paul's gonna be like, yeah, the writer Hebrews got to be like, yeah, or James has got to be like, or my friends down the street who are Jewish who kicked me out of the synagogue, is God on my side? These are my people kicking me out. It's like, well, yeah, that's good. And I think it's a good point. It's like the pain is good. The pain, actually, the suffering is unto obedience. As again, Dave, you're talking about Hebrews. Dave, that's what the writer of Hebrews says. He suffered to learn obedience, right? So like that is, and then obedience is pure joy because God would rather have obedience than sacrifice. So like that is pure joy and the will of the Father being completely united with him in mind and in work in the created world. Or the
I think inherently we all know this too. It's something we have to be reminded of because we get caught in this lie that pain equals true joy, or lack of pain equals true joy or something. Like no one endures Hell Week for football, right? Because they love being in the hot sun and doing burpees, like a gazillion burpees and whatever you have to do in Hell Week. Every one of those guys is thinking of the glory of running the ball in to the touchdown, or whatever, winning the state championship or whatever. And that's why you get all these athletic analogies in scripture as well. It's like no one's training because they love the pain of training. They're training for the glory and the joy. And that's what God has his sights on with the Son. So he's looking at the exaltation of the Son when he's looking at the cross. And therefore, he's willing to give his Son over very temporally over to the pain because he wants that glory for his Son. He wants his Son to be the king of Israel and to be the savior of his people. And so that's why he does it. It's so far away from child abuse that it's just ridiculous.
So what do you say to like the really progressive person who will say something like, oh, so Jesus had a bad weekend and that somehow, this is what they'll say, had a bad weekend and that somehow, him being dead for 3 days, that somehow saves me from eternal death.
Well, I think it's interesting that he can actually just do it in a weekend because he's awesome, not because it somehow it lessens anything that he did. So it's sort of like saying like, oh, sure. Well, God just, created everything in a week. I mean, it would have taken me 1 billion years. It's like, well, yeah, because you're not God. So, I mean, to me, that's a ridiculous objection, right?
It's just
not only
the way that they're trying to minimize the sacrifice.
Right.
Oh, well, he knew he was going to resurrect. So, it wasn't really that big of a deal.
It doesn't matter. It's not, we're not saved based on the fact of how much Jesus is in despair.
Yeah, it's not like he needs to be in purgatory and work off the sins of all people in a timely way.
Right. All he has to do is get booted out of the created order as the punishment for humanity, and then he's going to come right back in. That's all he's doing. He's just getting booted out so that the law is fulfilled and that the law now is crucified in that way and therefore has no more jurisdiction. The law has jurisdiction for those who are alive during their lifetime. And once they die, it doesn't have jurisdiction anymore because its final punishment is the wages of sin is death. It boots you out of the created order. So once it boots you out of the created order, that's it. It's done. It's null and void now. And since through Christ being unified to him, we're booted out of the created order.
But then why is there an eternal booting out of the created order if it's only just satisfied in death?
Because you'd have to be in Christ. Only Christ re-enters the created order. So you would have to be united to Christ to re-enter the created order. Yeah. Once we're booted out, we're booted out. If you're not in him. There's
also, again, strange connection maybe. The economic language that we use for the substitution, which is right. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but because our society ties economics and with time, we think of time as if like, oh, well, if he traded a day, then I should only like get a day back. Because we're thinking about it economically and transactionally. Time doesn't function outside the created order in the same way, right?
I would say even worse is they like, well, in the scholastic realm, they're thinking of it legally. So not even like, not even in like economics, I guess. I think that's a good point. But even like in a legal sense, you do time served based off of the what you did. So if you murder, your time served is for, I don't, in our context, it's life, whatever that is, 90 years. So if you're taking, if you're taking everyone's murder on yourself, in a legal sense, you're going to be dead for like 1 billion years before you resurrect.
Well, that's a misunderstanding of what the punishment is, right? Everybody thinks the punishment is hell, and it's like that's not the punishment. The punishment is the wages of sin is death, not hell. So death is you are exiled from the created order, just like in the beginning, exiled from the garden. Everybody's like, oh, well, they didn't die that day. And it's like, no, they did. That's what exile is. Exile, they died that day. Exile is you're exiled from the created order. That's the punishment. Now, if you can't go back into the created order and you're an eternal being that's going to be resurrected from the dead, there's no other place to put you except for this other place that was prepared for the devil and his angels. So now you're going to go there. But that's the only place because the rest is created order. There is no other place that's not created order except that place. And you can't go into non-existence or whatever. You're going to float in space. I mean, so that's where you go. Although, people think that's what it is because it talks about the eternal darkness or whatever, but you get the point. People misunderstand, and therefore you'll get these arguments to where, well, because Christ is God, he's suffered an eternity because he's infinite in those few moments of time. And it's like, well, that's kind of a weird thing because it's supposed to be the human Jesus taking on our punishment, not God the Son. And I get that, like, it almost seems like are you talking about where there's two people now? Like, there's only one person of the Son.
Problematic.
So it's like, is the one person, experiencing eternity, and its humanity is therefore, again, it's not that you can't do that. I just think it's completely unnecessary because that's not actually the punishment. The punishment is you're kicked out of the created order, and that happened on the cross, which is why our atonement is always said to be on the tree, on the cross. That's where he paid for our sins, not in hell afterward.
Right. And that's like, and just to expand on that, this is why you have additions to like the Apostles' Creed, and he descended into hell, because it's this flawed view of what Christ is doing in the atonement, taking on the wrath. He actually, and some aspects, people think that he did go to hell, either to.
I never repeat that part. Fifth century edition of the.
It is an addition, right? We say Hades because that could just be death. That can be the cross itself.
Yeah, the place of death.
Yeah, the place of death. But hell is nonsensical in the understanding of what Christ is doing.
Well, literally, what does he say on the cross? There's two things that indicate that he actually did not go to like any other place than
finished.
Right.
And then
today, you'll be with me in paradise. And then when he dies, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.
Yeah.
And it's like, that doesn't seem like he's going to hell.
He took a detour on the way there.
Right. I mean, now there is the whole passage where he proclaims to the spirits, and people think that that's like dead people or whatever. But I mean, I think most scholars take the view that he goes to proclaim to those angels that were trying to subvert creation at the beginning of the time of Noah. So in the primeval history, to let them know they utterly failed, that he has taken back the world. And so that's the gospel he is proclaiming to them, not to save them, but to let them know that they have been defeated.
Here, guys, it's your second chance.
Told you so.
Well, this is where the doctrine. This is where people get the doctrine of praying for the dead, or that people do. Christ gave them the gospel, gave them a second chance, or whatever.
So it was a victory lap.
Yes, because that's what kings do, right? When you are victorious, you have your victory lap, and then it talks about how he led captive a host of captives, which refers to us, which is why immediately after saying that, it refers to therefore he gave gifts to men, and talks about the church. We are literally his captives that he is parading around the world, showing the demons, I won these people, and I won the world.
Well, thanks for watching. If you like what you heard, hit the like button. If you didn't like what you heard, hit it anyway. Subscribe. We got a lot more, maybe even a lot more David. If you like David on the podcast, if we get 100 likes,
like the video if you like David.
Yeah, David will be on next week. So it's all on everyone to get David back here.
Really?
I mean, I have an internet connection.
Hey, I'll let you know if you get 100 likes. You're coming back, man. So, but if you really, really liked us, you can join the rebellion. Join our Patreon. There's the link. We got different tiers. You can support the ministry. We pay our producer and bread and water right now. So if you want to, give him some better food.
You realize that's a punishment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And like you might ask, what do we get if I'm a patron? What do I get if I actually pay you my money? And I would say you get us earlier than everybody else. You can hang out with us before everybody else on YouTube is going to hang out with us, and then you just get the satisfaction that your dollar.
You get our undying appreciation.
Yeah, that your dollar is putting my face on this camera. So
occasionally we'll do a special Patreon.
Yeah,
review of a book or movie or something, and whatnot.
Yeah, we just did on David's household show.
That was just for Patreon, though.
Oh, okay. Was that just? No, that was on.
We released it.
Oh well, see, we're nice that way. But I think there's like 3 episodes of it. Maybe we'll do a watch party with donuts again. or something.
Oh, by the way, I forgot I did start watching it.
Oh, did you?
And
It's already out?
I stopped as soon as David was like arguing with his dad.
Oh
Oh,
no!
I was like, oh, dude, if you're
No.
gonna Americanize
oh
this
no!
kid, that's I highly doubt under the law if you like rebel against your father at that age or say something against him, like that would be a common
But
thing.
I'm gonna
that
be
David would have
king,
done.
Dad. I know
Yeah.
better than you.
Yeah, yeah.
I can
He
tell.
does.
Was
he talks back and he basically rebukes his dad for like as though his dad doesn't get it or something, like
Oh,
a
no.
teenager, like a teenager would.
So was his dad telling him to
America.
go like look after the sheep? Is that what he was doing? And he's like,
Yeah.
no, I don't want to. That's
Yeah.
That's
No, not
literally-
like, no, more like he knows what to do with the sheep, but his dad doesn't, or something.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh my god.
I was like, I'm done. I'm done already.
Thanks a lot, CREC.
Rage.
Well, it
Isn't
literally
that
gives
his-
it gives this big thing of it's like the events depicted here may not be historically or biblically accurate, but have been
Oh, good.
modified for artistic value. Or
Then
whatever
why
it is.
bother?
Storytelling.
Well, at least they were honest about it.
Because it's like The Chosen. They know they're going to get a big audience if they
Oh,
like
The Chosen's so
add all the
good.
drama to it and all that.
See, so I said this to Drake yesterday, and I said it to some people at the fellowship meal too. Art is not entertainment; it's soul training. If we
Yeah.
screw it up, we screw up what we love, and that's not good.
That's why you watch Prince of Egypt.
Prime is like art.
David and I will forever be arguing for stories.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah. Well, that's why Amazon Prime is, art is money to them.
Art is,
Yeah.
yeah, my yacht.
Art,
Right.
in quotes.
Your art is my garbage tomorrow. I'm gonna
Yeah.
just absolutely bastardize it and destroy it, but it'll make me a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I'll see David kill Goliath, I guess, maybe. Eventually.
Even that, you know how that happens. So they show what's gonna happen. So they show that scene
Yeah.
first.
Oh, like
And
a
it's
flashback
David.
or something?
It's David running to Goliath, and Goliath's like throwing spears, and he's like missing him. So he's like doing all these acrobatic. David's doing all this. It's like, wait a minute, I thought he was a shepherd. What's with the acrobatics?
He's also
And
a
then-
gymnast.
And
He's also
then
a
finally,
ninja assassin.
Yeah.
Goliath actually kind of brushes him with a spear,
No.
and, he
He
falls
missed
down, and he's knocked down, and he's knocked out.
What?
Oh my.
It's like, oh, so I can't wait to see what happens next, specifically because that part's not actually in the Bible.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
I
you-
don't know what's gonna happen. Is he gonna kill Goliath? Because
Is
he
he
just
gonna
got
win, or-
speared.
I don't. Who knows? It's Amazon. Goliath could win this time. Maybe Amazon's like, you know what?
Well,
We're Goliath. I
Amazon
wanna
is
win.
Goliath, so they want to win.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's even worse than Malcolm Gladwell's take on David and Goliath. Okay, like
Oh
I
no.
know.
if you're familiar or not,
He's
that's
no.
even worse than that.
He just needs to walk up and swing the thing and kill him like right away. Like, and
No,
he's like,
no,
what?
it's
That's
got to
just
be
not
overly
very
dramatic.
cinematic, Drake.
Yeah.
No, you could do this in a beautiful cinematic way. Like you could really be. Anyway, sorry.
You could put a GoPro on the rock and just like watch it like hit his sink into his head.
You're right, though, Drake. It is about the rock because it starts with a "Can one rock change
Yeah,
the
I
course
told
of the
you.
world?"
I knew it.
It
I knew
is.
he was gonna do that.
Does Dwayne
is.
Johnson show up?
I would not be surprised.
He's actually
should've been
No,
Goliath.
Goliath.
they can't afford him for this. He's
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you're getting a sneak peek at what you'll get if you pay Patreon.
If you pay us money, we will force
Pay us
ourselves
money.
to watch this. We've done
Yes,
it before. with
we'll
things
give you
like
art
that.
that entertains you, and David will be very upset. But thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Haven't read the series, might not understand what would need to happen.
Have you read all of them?
I've read all of Frank Herbert's novels. Yes.
Oh, you've read all of them. I've
I have
only
read
read
all
the
of
first one because my
I
grandma told me
trudged
that
through
the other
them.
ones were bad.
Let me just start with this. Frank Herbert is not a good storyteller. Not a good storyteller. He's a fantastic world builder. By Morgoth. I am your only future. But they don't like they're bred for war. So like Saruman like literally grows them in his under
In like his vat.
yeah, in his
orc
vats,
vat.
right? And he like gives a sword to him, and they go fight. That's like, and Uruk-hai are like better than the original orc or whatever because they can be in the daylight.
The reason why I like Moby Dick so much is, to me, there's a parallel with Genesis. So it's actually history. It's history that Melville he's interviewed. This actually occurred to a bunch of whalers.
Yeah.
And the survivors he interviewed.
Yeah.
And it became this book. But notice how he's writing this history. It's not, here's all the facts that happened. All right, the end. He's writing it because he wants to put meaning and a message to what has occurred.